the beginning that no one saw coming. The hall was silent when Prime Minister Modi walked onto the stage. It was the Global Innovation and Humanity Summit, a place where world leaders, scientists, and entrepreneurs gathered to share ideas that could change lives. Sundar Pichai was sitting quietly in the front row, his daughter Kavya by his side. She was only 16, shy but brilliant, with a spark in her eyes that reminded everyone of her father's calm strength. As the applause faded, Modi looked around the hall and said softly, "Today, we are not just here to talk about machines or technology. We are here to talk about hearts." His words hung in the air. People expected another speech about progress, economy, or AI, but the Prime Minister's tone was different. Then Modi turned his gaze toward Sundar. "Sometimes," he continued, "a single voice of kindness teaches the world more than any invention." A murmur spread through the audience. Cameras focused on Sundar, who looked surprised. Kavya glanced at her father, unsure why Modi had paused there. The Prime Minister smiled gently. "Many of you know Sundar Pichai as a great innovator," he said. "But today, I will tell you something about his daughter that very few people know." The crowd leaned forward. Even Sundar looked puzzled. Modi's voice softened. Last year, during the floods in South India, a small team of volunteers created an AI-powered signal network to help rescuers find people trapped under debris. It saved hundreds of lives. The software was written by a young girl, quiet, unseen, who refused to take credit. Sundar's eyes widened. Kavya's hands trembled slightly in her lap. Modi continued, "That young girl was Kavya Pichai." The hall went completely silent. Even the media lights seemed to dim. Sundar looked down, overwhelmed. Kavya covered her mouth in shock. The Prime Minister's tone grew emotional. When reporters tried to find her, she refused interviews. When the government wanted to honor her, she said, "Please give the medal to the volunteers who were there in the rain. They are the real heroes." The audience gasped softly. Some smiled with tears forming in their eyes. Sundar blinked rapidly, holding back emotion. Modi turned toward Kavya. "Beta," he said warmly, "you have taught us that true leadership is not about standing in front. It is about lifting others quietly." The applause that followed was not just loud, it was heartfelt. People stood up. Sundar's face softened with pride and disbelief. But behind the applause, Kavya's mind was racing. She whispered to her father. "Papa, how did he know?" Sundar leaned closer. "I don't know, Beta," he whispered. "I never told anyone." And that was the moment the story truly began. The moment when a girl's secret kindness, buried deep in silence, was brought into the light by a leader who somehow knew her truth. As the applause faded, Modi turned serious again. "But what the world doesn't know," he said, "is what happened after that night. The reason Kavya created that program and the person she was trying to save." The hall went silent again. Suspense filled every corner of the room. Sundar's hand tightened around his daughter's, and Modi said quietly, "It began with a message she sent to me." The audience froze. Sundar looked completely stunned. Kavya's eyes widened in disbelief. No one knew that the Prime Minister of India had ever received a personal message from Sundar Pichai's teenage daughter. "That message," Modi said, "was just 4 lines long. But those 4 lines changed how I saw technology, leadership, and what it means to be human." He paused, looked directly at Sundar, and continued softly. "It said, 'Sir, I don't want to be famous. I just want to help someone who is waiting under the rain. Please don't let them be forgotten.'" Gasps rippled through the hall. Sundar's chest tightened. Kavya lowered her head, tears pooling in her eyes. That single line, "Please don't let them be forgotten," would become the heartbeat of the story the world would never forget. And as the cameras zoomed in, Modi smiled gently and said, "Sometimes, a child's small wish becomes a nation's great reminder." But what no one in the audience knew yet was that Kavya's wish came from something much deeper, a painful memory she had carried alone, something even her father did not know. The night after the summit, that truth would begin to unfold. The message that carried paint at night, after the summit ended and the bright lights of the hall faded away, the world began talking. News channels replayed Modi's words over and over. Social media filled with praise for Sundar Pichai's daughter, calling her the girl who built hope. Hashtags trended across countries. Yet inside the quiet of their hotel suite, Kavya sat by the window staring at the city lights in silence. Her father entered the room slowly. He didn't speak at first. Sundar had seen the brightest stages in the world, but nothing had shaken him the way Modi's revelation did. He poured a glass of water, walked toward his daughter, and said softly, "Beta, you never told me about that message." Kavya didn't look up. Her fingers kept tracing the fog on the window. "I didn't want anyone to know," she whispered. "It wasn't about me." Sundar knelt beside her, lowering his voice. "Then who was it about?" Kavya turned slowly, her eyes wet but steady. "It was about someone I couldn't save." The word struck Sundar's heart like a sudden wind. "Someone you couldn't save?" he repeated quietly. "Who, Kavya?" She hesitated for a long time. The sound of traffic outside filled the silence. Finally, she whispered, "A girl named Mira." Sundar blinked. "Mira?" Kavya nodded. "She was just 12. I met her online through a student science forum last year. She lived in a small village near Chennai. We used to talk about building small drones that could drop water bottles in flood zones. She wanted to become an engineer. She said she wanted to save her village one day." Kavya stopped for a moment and breathed deeply. "When the floods came, I tried to call her. But the signals were gone. The roads were gone. Everything was underwater. I kept trying for hours, but there was no answer. I knew she was out there. I felt it. I could see her message flashing on my phone, the last one she sent me. 'Don't forget me if I disappear.'" Sundar's throat tightened. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away gently. "So I stayed up that night," Kavya continued. "I couldn't sleep. I started writing code to connect offline drones through Bluetooth chains. I thought, maybe if one of them could fly low enough, it could send a signal back. I didn't think it would work, but it did. The rescuers found people in that same area because of that signal. But they didn't find Mira." Her voice broke. "They said the current took her. She was never found." The room went silent. Sundar felt a cold weight settle inside his chest. His daughter's quiet invention, the one the world now praised, was born not from ambition, but from heartbreak. He spoke softly, trying to steady his voice. "And the message you sent to Modi ji? It was about her?" Kavya nodded. "Yes, I wrote it after I realized she was gone. I thought maybe someone would remember her name. Not the code, not me, just her." Sundar closed his eyes for a moment. He felt a deep ache that only a parent could understand. The ache of realizing his child had carried pain in silence. "Beta," he said gently, "you did something extraordinary. You turned your pain into hope for others. That's something most people never learn." But Kavya shook her head. "It still feels wrong to be called a hero. I didn't save her." Sundar reached out and placed his hand over hers. "Maybe not her body, but you saved her dream. You made sure no other child would be forgotten in that kind of darkness. That's what real heroism looks like." For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the city beyond the window. Then Kavya whispered, "Why did Modi ji tell that story? How did he even know about the message?" "I sent it from my school email. I never signed it as your daughter." Sundar looked thoughtful. "Maybe someone in his team traced it back," he said softly. "Or maybe—" He remembered it because of how it was written. "Sometimes sincerity finds its way through walls that power can't see." He stood up, pacing slowly. "But what I don't understand," he murmured, "is why he chose to reveal it now. He must have a reason." That night, as the world slept, Sundar sent a short message to the Prime Minister's office. "Thank you for your words tonight. May I ask how you came to know about Kavya's message?" The reply didn't come immediately. Hours passed. The hotel grew quiet. Kavya had fallen asleep, curled beside her laptop, her face peaceful but tired. Sundar stayed awake, staring at his phone until the screen dimmed. At dawn, a message finally arrived. It was short. "We will speak tomorrow morning. I think it's time you both knew the whole story." Sundar's pulse quickened. "The whole story?" he whispered to himself. The next morning, they arrived at the Prime Minister's residence in Delhi. Modi welcomed them not as guests, but as family. There was no camera, No press, only a warm, quiet room with sunlight spilling through the curtains. After tea was served, Modi looked at Kavya with kind eyes. "You're wondering how I knew about your message, aren't you?" Kavya nodded timidly. Modi smiled softly. "Because the night you sent it, I wasn't in my office. I was in the flood zone." Sundar froze. "You were there?" "Yes," Modi said, his voice calm but heavy with memory. "I had gone quietly without media to meet the rescue teams. One of the volunteers handed me a small device, a drone transmitter. He said a little girl somewhere had built the code that made it possible. And then he showed me your message, printed on paper, because they had found it attached to a box floating near the riverbank." Kavya's lips parted in shock. Modi's voice softened. "It was sealed in plastic, written in your handwriting. It said, 'Please don't let them be forgotten.' I never forgot that message. When I saw your name again at the summit list, I recognized it." Sundar's eyes filled with tears he couldn't hide. "But there's more," Modi continued quietly. "The volunteer who found that box told me something else. Before the flood, a little girl named Mira had built it with her father. She wanted to use it to send help signals across villages. The code inside was yours, but the casing, the design, the idea came from her. You and she were partners, though you never met." Kavya's breath caught. Her hands trembled. She built the box?" Modi nodded. "She must have attached your message before it drifted away. Maybe she knew it would reach someone. Maybe she trusted that her friend somewhere far away would carry her dream forward." A tear rolled down Kavya's cheek. Sundar closed his eyes. The air in the room felt sacred. Modi leaned closer and said softly, "So when I said the world needs to remember, I didn't mean fame. I meant the quiet bond between two children who built something pure, something born of kindness." Sundar whispered, "Sir, thank you for keeping that promise." Modi looked at him and said, "No, Sundar. It was your daughter who reminded us what technology is for. Not for power, but for people." The conversation continued for hours. Modi spoke of creating a new initiative inspired by Kavya's story, an open network for young innovators to build solutions for villages and disasters. He wanted to call it Mira's Light. When he said the name, Kavya's face softened with a fragile smile. It felt as though Mira had come alive again in that moment. But just as they began to leave, Modi turned to Sundar and said quietly, "There's one more thing you should know. The box that carried your daughter's message, it didn't just carry hope. It carried something else too, something she never told anyone." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, sealed packet. Sundar and Kavya stared at it in silence. Inside was a folded piece of paper, aged, crinkled, but still legible. "This," Modi said, "was found inside the same box. I think it was meant for you." Sundar's hands shook as he unfolded it. The handwriting was messy, written with the innocence of a child. It said, "Dear Kavya, if you read this, it means I didn't make it. But don't be sad. I believe your code will save someone else. Promise me one thing, don't stop building hope even when it hurts." The room went silent. Kavya pressed her face into her father's chest, crying softly. Modi looked away for a moment, his eyes glistening too. And then, with a gentle voice, he said, "You see, Sundar, when a child writes words like that, the whole world must listen. That's why I spoke last night, not to praise, but to remind. Kindness does not die with the person who gives it. It lives in the next heart that carries it." The silence that followed was deeper than words. But the story wasn't over yet, because as Modi spoke those lines, a phone buzzed in his pocket, an urgent message from the rescue ministry. They had found something new in the same flood zone, something connected to Mira's family, and what they discovered next would change everything. The journey back to where it all began. The car moved slowly through the narrow road that led toward the southern plains of Tamil Nadu. Heavy clouds gathered above, just like the ones from that terrible week a year ago. Sundar Pichai sat in silence beside Prime Minister Modi, while Kavya looked out of the window, her fingers pressed gently against the glass. She was watching the landscape shift from cities to fields, from comfort to memory. Modi had personally arranged the journey. After the message from the rescue ministry arrived, he turned to Sundar and said, "They found something in the same area where Mira once lived. I think you both should come with me." Now, hours later, the convoy rolled through a quiet village road, lined with coconut trees bent by wind. The air carried a mix of earth and salt. They passed broken walls, half-standing huts, and faded rescue markings painted in red across old stones. It felt like the past had frozen there. The jeep stopped near the remains of a small school. Birds scattered as the doors opened. A government official approached, holding a sealed plastic bag and a small wooden box wrapped in cloth. "Sir," the official said, bowing slightly. "This was found when we cleared the eastern edge near the old well. It was buried under mud. We think it drifted here from the flooded area." Modi nodded gently and motioned to Sundar. "Go on, open it." Sundar took the wooden box carefully. The cloth was rough, woven by hand, with faint stitching that looked like a child's work. He brushed the dirt away and noticed something carved on the lid, a small symbol of two intertwined circles, one slightly larger than the other. Kavya's breath caught. "That's the logo we drew," she whispered. "When Mira and I were working on the project online, we decided to call it Two Hands, One Hope. She said it meant that distance doesn't matter when hearts connect." Sundar looked at her with quiet awe. "She really built everything with meaning." He opened the box slowly. Inside lay a faded photograph of two girls. One was Kavya, smiling from a video screenshot. The other was Mira, holding a small model drone. Someone had printed it from their online chat. Underneath was a rusted bracelet made of copper wire, twisted neatly into the same two-circle pattern. But there was also a folded note. Sundar handed it to Kavya, who opened it carefully. The handwriting was childish but clear. "If anyone finds this, please tell my friend Kavya that I didn't give up." The signal worked. People came. They saved others, so it was worth it. Kavya covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Modi placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Your friend didn't leave the world empty," he said softly. "She left it full of courage." A gust of wind swept across the ruins. Dust rose like quiet ghosts. Sundar knelt near a cracked wall where faint pencil marks showed childish math formulas. He ran his hand across them gently and whispered, "She must have studied here." "She did," said a frail voice behind them. They turned. An elderly man stood leaning on a wooden cane, wearing a simple white dhoti. His eyes were kind but heavy with years. "I was the headmaster here," he said quietly. "Mira studied in this school. She was a bright child, always drawing machines on her notebooks. When the floods came, she didn't run away. She stayed behind to help." He pointed toward the far side of the broken compound. "That's where we found her father's tools. He was a mechanic. She used to sit beside him, fixing fans and radios. She said one day she'd build something that could hear even when people couldn't shout." Those words hit Kavya deeply. Something that could hear even when people couldn't shout. That was exactly what her code had done. It was as if Mira had spoken those words into her soul without ever meeting her. The old man looked at Kavya carefully. "You must be her friend," he said. "She talked about you before the floods." She said, "My friend from far away listens with her heart, not with her ears." Kavya couldn't speak. Her tears ran freely now. Sundar gently placed his arm around her. Modi stood silently, his hands folded, his expression solemn and thoughtful. After a while, the headmaster invited them into the only room that still had a roof. Inside, the walls were covered in drawings made by children, drones, bridges, smiling suns, stick figure rescues. On one side, in faded blue marker, was a message that made everyone stop walking: Mira and Kavya's project. Don't forget the signal of hope. Modi stepped closer and touched the words gently, as if they were sacred. "This," he said softly, "should never be erased." They stayed in the village till sunset. Villagers began to gather, curious at first, then emotional when they realized who the visitors were. One woman came forward holding a small basket of jasmine flowers. "This is for the little one who helped us," she said. "Not just Mira, but this young girl too." She looked at Kavya and smiled through tears. A group of children surrounded her, asking questions about the drones and her coding. One small boy tugged her sleeve and said, "Akka, can you teach us to build what Mira built?" Kavya knelt and smiled through her tears. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll teach you everything." The next morning, Modi announced something unexpected. Standing before the villagers, with cameras now far away, he said, "This land will become the first Mira's Light Innovation Center. It will not be a monument. It will be a place where children can learn, create, and keep hope alive. And the first teacher here," he turned toward Kavya, "will be the one who carried Mira's dream forward." The villagers clapped softly, some crying openly. Sundar's eyes glistened. Kavya lowered her head humbly and said, "Sir, I'm not a teacher." Modi smiled. "You already are. Because a true teacher doesn't need a classroom, just a heart that remembers." The following days turned into a blur of activity. Engineers arrived to rebuild the small school. Google volunteers joined local workers to set up simple labs powered by solar panels. The government arranged computers and internet access. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the fields, Kavya would sit outside with the village children, showing them how to draw drone circuits on paper. She didn't speak much. Her quiet patience reminded everyone of her father. Sundar often stood a few steps away, just watching her, realizing that this small village had become the bridge between his world of technology and her world of compassion. One evening, while Kavya was teaching, a little boy handed her a piece of folded paper. "A man gave me this for you," he said. "He said you'd understand." Kavya opened it. Inside was a sketch, two hands holding a tiny glowing light. Underneath were the words, "For the one who listened when I whispered." Her breath stopped. "Who gave you this?" she asked quickly. The boy pointed toward the dirt road that led away from the school. "He left on a bicycle," he said. He was old, but his eyes were kind. Kavya stood up, heart pounding. She ran toward the road, but the figure was already gone. She looked around helplessly, her hair blowing in the wind. When she returned, she showed the note to Sundar. "Papa, look," she said. "This is the same symbol Mira used. 2 hands, 1 light. But who could have drawn it?" Sundar studied it carefully, his brow furrowed. "Maybe her father," he whispered. Modi, who had just arrived from another meeting, heard the words and froze. "Her father?" he said quietly. "But the record said he disappeared during the floods." The air grew tense. Kavya looked between them both. "What if he didn't?" Modi's expression turned thoughtful. "The ministry never found a body," he said slowly. "Only debris from his workshop. Maybe he's still alive." That night no one slept. Sundar and Modi stayed up discussing possibilities, while Kavya stared at the sketch under the lantern light, her heart heavy but hopeful. And just before dawn, a new message came through Modi's secure line, sent from a relief worker stationed near the coast. "We have found a man claiming to be Mira's father. He says he has something that belongs to Sundar Pichai's daughter." Modi looked up at Sundar and Kavya and said quietly, "It seems our story is not over yet. It's only just beginning." The next morning, they would set out again, toward the sea, toward answers, toward a meeting that would bring the past and the future face to face, and none of them were prepared for what that man would reveal. The man who carried silence. The morning sun broke through a thin layer of mist as the convoy moved toward the coast. Palm trees swayed in the wind, and the faint smell of salt filled the air. It had been 2 days since the message came, 2 days since someone claimed to be Mira's father. For Sundar, every mile brought both hope and fear. For Kavya, it was as if the air itself whispered the girl's name. And for Modi, it was another reminder that kindness often hides in places where the world doesn't look. They drove for hours until the roads turned rough and narrow. Finally, a relief worker standing beside a small tent waved at them. "Sir," he said, "he's waiting by the old jetty. He didn't want to come near the camp." Kavya's heartbeat quickened. Sundar glanced at her, sensing her nervousness. "Whatever happens," he said gently, "we listen first. Sometimes answers need silence before words." As they stepped out, the sea breeze hit their faces. The shore was empty except for one figure standing near the water. An old man, thin, weathered, his clothes faded and patched. He held something wrapped in cloth, pressed tightly against his chest. When he turned around, his eyes, deep, tired, but strangely peaceful, met theirs. He didn't speak at first. He looked at Kavya, then at Sundar, and then his eyes lingered on Modi. There was a moment of quiet recognition, as though he already knew who they were. Modi took a step forward. Are you Mira's father? The old man nodded slowly. Yes, he said, his voice soft but steady. My name is Shankar. Kavya's breath caught. She wanted to say something, but the weight of emotion froze her voice. Shankar smiled faintly, seeing her struggle. You must be Kavya, he said. My Mira talked about you every day. She said you were her friend who could make machines listen to pain. The wind grew stronger. Waves crashed behind them. Sundar swallowed hard. We thought you were gone, he said quietly. The report said that I was dead, Shankar finished, nodding. Yes, many thought that. Maybe I was for a while. When the flood came, I tried to save Mira and her mother. I lost them both that night. I was swept away, broken, and when I woke, I was in a hospital miles away. By the time I returned, everything was gone. My home, my tools, my people. Even my name felt empty. His voice cracked, but he didn't cry. He had run out of tears long ago. So I started walking, helping where I could, fixing radios, building small things for rescue workers. I didn't speak of who I was because every time I said her name, my heart tore again. Modi stepped closer, his face calm but full of respect. Why did you come forward now? Shankar looked at Kavya. Because the world remembered her. And you remembered her too. He carefully unwrapped the cloth he had been holding. Inside was a small metal box, similar to the one they had found earlier, but this one was polished, repaired, restored with care. The same symbol was etched on it, 2 hands, 1 hope. This was her last invention, Shankar said softly. The one she made the night before the flood. She said it was a gift for you? Kavya's eyes widened. For me, he nodded. She told me, when I meet Kavya one day, I'll give her this box so she can finish what we started. I never thought I'd get the chance. But when I saw the news, when I saw you standing beside the Prime Minister, I knew it was time. He handed the box to her with trembling hands. Kavya accepted it as though it were made of glass. Her fingers brushed over the engraving, tracing every line. Tears streamed down her face. She believed in you, Shankar continued. She said you would change the world, not with machines, but with your heart. She said the world needed more people who could feel before they fix. Sundar looked away, overwhelmed. Modi bowed his head slightly, his hands folded in quiet respect. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The only sound was the ocean, steady and endless, like time itself. Finally, Kavya opened the box. Inside lay a tiny chip connected to a small handwritten note. Her hands shook as she unfolded the paper. Dear Kavya, if you're reading this, it means the flood came and I couldn't reach you. But it's okay. I'm not scared. I know your code will find me in another way. Inside this chip is the start of something new. It's a signal that can travel through water and air, like a heartbeat that never stops. Promise me you'll finish it. Call it whatever you want, but make it remember love, not loss. The note ended with a small drawing of a sun. Kavya's tears fell onto the paper. She never gave up, she whispered. Even when she knew. Shankar placed his hand gently on her shoulder. Hope doesn't drown, Betty. It floats. She proved that. Modi looked out at the horizon, his voice steady but filled with emotion. She was a child, yet her vision was greater than most leaders I've met. We must honor her not with words, but with work. Turning to Sundar, he said, Google has reach. India has heart. Let's build something together, something that carries both. Sundar nodded slowly, still staring at the box. A project that connects every corner of the country during disaster, an open network that listens when no one else can. Modi smiled. Yes, let's make sure no voice is ever lost again. We'll call it Project Two Hands. But as they discussed plans, Shankar remained quiet, looking at the sea. His eyes glistened, yet his face carried peace. She used to come here, he murmured softly. Before the flood, she would sit right there, watching the sunset and say, Papa, when I'm gone, my light will stay in the water. His voice trembled. Maybe she was right. Kavya walked closer to him, holding the box. Your daughter's light is in all of us now, she said quietly, and I'll make sure it never fades. That night, Modi insisted they all stay in the nearby coastal rest house. The evening sky turned gold and red, waves glowing under the fading light. Sundar stood by the balcony watching Kavya and Shankar talk by the shore. She was asking him questions about Mira's favorite things, her songs, her dreams, her little jokes. For the first time, Shankar smiled. Really smiled. Later, as darkness fell, a gentle rain began. Kavya came back to her room carrying the box and Mira's letter. Sundar was sitting on the bed, reading the note again. "Papa," she said softly, "I think I know what she meant by the signal that never stops. It's not just about technology. It's about remembering." Sundar looked up. "Remembering?" "Yes," Kavya said, her eyes glowing in the lamplight. "Every time we remember someone with kindness, we send out a signal, too. It travels in hearts instead of wires." Sundar smiled faintly, pride mixing with emotion. "You've grown wiser than your age, Beta." She sat beside him. "No," she said quietly. "Mira made me that way." A knock came at the door. Modi entered, holding his shawl tightly against the rain. "The storm is coming again," he said. "But don't worry, it's light this time." He looked at Kavya and smiled warmly. "You remind me of my mother, you know." She also turned her pain into purpose. Kavya smiled shyly. "Thank you, sir. And tomorrow," Modi said, "we'll announce Project Two Hands officially. We'll dedicate it to both of you, Mira, the dreamer, and Kavya, the builder." But as he said those words, thunder rolled far away, echoing across the coast. Shankar, standing outside, looked toward the ocean and whispered something none of them could hear. The next morning, as dawn broke, the waves carried a strange sight, a floating object, round and shining faintly in the light. The rescue team pulled it out of the water. It was another of Mira's prototypes, almost perfectly intact, its small solar cells still blinking. Etched on its surface were 3 words: "Hope never ends." Kavya stood speechless. Sundar felt a shiver run down his spine. Modi closed his eyes and murmured a quiet prayer. And as the sun rose higher, lighting up the sea like liquid gold, Shankar whispered softly, "She's still talking to us." It was then Sundar realized this story was not just about loss or invention. It was about legacy, about the invisible threads that kindness leaves behind, tying hearts across distance, time, and even life itself. But fate wasn't done with them yet. For in the coming days, Project Two Hands would face its first test, a sudden disaster that would push Kavya, Modi, and Sundar to the edge of faith. And once again, the world would see what kindness can do when everything else fails. The storm that tested everything, the announcement of Project Two Hands, filled headlines across the world. For the first time, a government, a global tech giant, and a teenager had joined forces for one purpose: to make sure no one would ever go unheard again. The project promised to connect even the remotest corners of India through low-power, AI-driven signals that could function without internet, powered only by sunlight and human will. For days after the launch, people celebrated. Newspapers carried photos of Kavya and Modi standing together beside a glowing drone prototype, while Sundar stood quietly behind them, pride shining in his eyes. Modi had said during the ceremony, "This project was not born in a laboratory. It was born in love, loss, and the heart of a child who refused to give up." But even as the world cheered, nature began writing its own test. In a coastal town hundreds of miles away, dark clouds gathered silently over the Bay of Bengal. Fishermen spoke in hushed tones about the sea behaving differently. Animals fled inland. Within 48 hours, weather stations confirmed it. A powerful cyclone, moving faster than any in recent years, was headed straight for the southern coast. The news reached Delhi like a spark in dry grass. Modi immediately called an emergency meeting. "We cannot wait for the storm to hit," he said firmly. "Activate the network. Let Project Two Hands prove its purpose." Within minutes, Google engineers and local volunteers connected hundreds of solar drones, forming a long, invisible chain from the coastal villages to the central data hub in Chennai. Sundar oversaw the technical side, while Kavya handled the signal calibration herself. It was the first time her code would be tested in a real disaster. As she worked, her fingers trembled slightly over the keyboard. "Papa," she whispered, "what if it fails?" Sundar placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "Then we learn," he said. "But if it works, we save lives, and that's worth every risk." By nightfall, Winds had reached terrifying speed. Power lines snapped, communication towers collapsed, and darkness swallowed entire towns. But high above the chaos, the small drones glowed softly like fireflies, each one carrying Kavya's code, each one listening. From the control room, Kavya and Sundar watched as the data began flowing. Weak signals, coordinates, fragments of voice, desperate cries for help. Her program automatically linked them, prioritizing locations where multiple signals overlapped. Rescue teams began moving based on her data, and for a few hours, hope fought the storm. But then, something went wrong. A sudden surge of lightning struck near the main relay hub. Half the drones went offline. Screens in the control room flickered red. A young engineer shouted, "Signal drop in Sector 7 through 12. We've lost half the grid!" Panic rippled through the room. Sundar's mind raced. Kavya's face went pale. "If those go dark," she whispered, "we'll lose contact with entire villages." Modi's voice came through the radio from Delhi, calm but urgent. "Can it be restored?" Sundar turned to his daughter. "It depends on her," he said softly. Kavya stared at the blinking map. "The relay was built with a backup," she murmured, thinking out loud. "Mira and I designed a failsafe, a manual restart command using radio waves, but it needs someone physically near the transmitter to activate it." The technician froze. "Sir, that's impossible. The hub is 10 kilometers inside the red zone. It's directly in the cyclone's path." A long silence filled the room. The walls rattled with wind. Modi's voice came again, lower this time. "Then we need a volunteer." No one spoke. The storm outside screamed louder. Kavya suddenly stood up. "I'll go." Sundar's eyes widened in disbelief. "No," he said instantly. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. Papa, I built this system," she said firmly. "If I don't fix it, people will die." Sundar shook his head, voice trembling. "You are my daughter, Kavya. I already lost someone once in a flood. I won't let you walk into another." Tears filled her eyes. "And I promised Mira I'd never stop building hope, even when it hurts." The room went silent. Sundar stared at her, torn between fear and pride. Finally, he looked down, then up again, his voice breaking. "If you're going," he whispered, "I'm coming with you." Modi's voice came through again, quiet and steady. "I will alert the Coast Guard. But listen to me, both of you. If this works, it will not just save people tonight. It will save generations. Go carefully." They left immediately. Rain lashed against the jeep as they drove through flooded roads. Fallen trees blocked the way, forcing them to continue on foot. Lightning split the sky into silver cracks. "The hub should be just beyond the old lighthouse," Kavya shouted over the wind. "If we can reach it, I can send the restart code through the emergency antenna." Water reached their knees. The sound of the sea roared like thunder. Sundar held her hand tightly as they pushed forward, their clothes soaked, their breath heavy. Finally, through the curtain of rain, they saw it. The half-submerged tower, leaning but still standing. The metal structure groaned against the storm. Kavya climbed the steps, holding the waterproof transmitter. Sundar followed, shielding her from flying debris. She reached the panel, opened it, and connected the device. Her hands shook violently, fingers numb from cold. "Signal ready?" she said. "Just need to sync the code." Sundar held the flashlight, watching her type. "Hurry," he whispered. A wave slammed against the base of the tower, shaking it. Kavya nearly lost her balance, but grabbed the railing. 5 seconds, she muttered. "Just 5 more, and then the screen turned green. It's back," she shouted. "The network's alive." In the control room miles away, cheers erupted as the drones reconnected one by one. Rescue signals lit up again on every monitor. People clapped, cried, prayed. Modi stood silently in Delhi, his hands clasped tightly, eyes closed in relief. But on the coast, the wind howled even louder. Sundar grabbed Kavya's arm. "We did it. Now we go!" As they descended, a violent gust ripped part of the structure apart. Debris flew past them. Sundar shielded her with his body as a metal beam struck his shoulder. He stumbled but kept moving. They reached the jeep just as the worst of the storm passed. The sky, once roaring with rage, began to soften into gray silence. Hours later, as dawn broke, the world learned that over 2,000 people had been rescued because of Project Two Hands. The signal had guided helicopters, boats, and rescue teams across regions where even satellite links had failed. Reporters called it a miracle of courage and code. But in truth, it was more than that. It was a promise fulfilled. When Modi spoke to them later that day, his voice was thick with emotion. "Kavya," he said softly over the call, "you reminded the nation of something we often forget. Technology may save lives, but it's courage that gives it purpose." Sundar sat beside her, his arm bandaged but his eyes bright. "Your mother would be proud," he whispered. "And Mira, too," Kavya smiled faintly. "Maybe they're both watching." A few days later, the nation held a memorial for the victims. Thousands gathered, candles glowing across the beach where the storm had hit. Modi, Sundar, and Kavya stood together on stage. When Modi spoke, his words carried across the sea like a prayer. 1 year ago, a young girl named Mira wrote to her friend, asking her not to let the forgotten stay forgotten. Today, because of her dream and Kavya's courage, no voice was lost in this storm. This is what India stands for, compassion that endures, even against the wind. The audience stood in silence. Sundar lowered his head, overcome with emotion. Kavya held the small metal box that had once belonged to Mira, and then, as if on cue, a single drone rose into the air, its soft blue light flickering like a heartbeat. People watched as it floated upward, higher and higher, until it disappeared into the sunrise. Modi whispered, "There goes Mira's light." And as the crowd bowed their heads, Kavya closed her eyes and whispered to the wind, "Thank you, my friend." But that wasn't the end. Days later, as calm returned, a message arrived at Sundar's private inbox from an unknown source. It contained only one sentence. "Your daughter's signal was heard beyond the storm," and attached was an image, an aerial shot from a satellite, showing the faint shape of glowing drones across the coastline, forming two circles intertwined, the same symbol that Mira had drawn. Sundar stared at the screen, heart pounding. He turned to Kavya and whispered, "Do you see it?" Even now, she's still sending hope. And in that moment, he realized the signal Mira had dreamed of wasn't just carried by machines. It lived in hearts that refused to forget. The speech that made the world cry the morning after the cyclone's end. India woke to headlines that read like poetry. The storm came for destruction, but it left behind hope. Newspapers, radios, and television channels across continents carried the same story. A young girl's code, written in the quiet corners of her room, had guided thousands to safety when everything else failed. Foreign leaders called Project Two Hands a miracle of compassion-driven innovation. World media called it the dawn of emotional technology. Yet, in the middle of this praise, Sundar Pichai sat quietly in a hospital waiting room, his arm still in a sling while Kavya slept beside him, her small hand resting over Mira's box on the table. She had not let go of it once since the storm. The door opened and Prime Minister Modi stepped inside. There were no cameras this time, no reporters, no bright lights. Just a calm silence between three people who had witnessed something bigger than fame. Modi smiled softly, walking closer. "How is she?" Sundar looked up, his voice low but full of warmth. "She hasn't stopped smiling since the rescue ended. She keeps saying it feels like Mira finally came home." Modi nodded slowly, looking at the sleeping girl. "Sometimes," he said, "home is not a place, it's a promise kept." He sat down, folding his hands, his face thoughtful. "Sundar, tomorrow we hold the World Humanitarian Summit. Leaders from 50 nations will attend. They want to hear about Project Two Hands, but I want something different." Sundar raised his brows. "Different?" Modi's eyes softened. "I want them to hear about Kavya, not as your daughter, not as a prodigy, but as a child who carried pain and turned it into purpose. The world has enough speeches about technology. It needs to remember the people behind it." Sundar felt a lump rise in his throat. "She will be nervous, sir. She's never spoken publicly." "She won't need to," Modi replied gently. "I will speak for her. She has already spoken through her actions." The next morning, the convention hall in Delhi was filled beyond capacity. Representatives from the United Nations, World Bank, tech firms, and humanitarian organizations filled the seats. Banners of unity and resilience hung from the high ceilings. Outside, thousands gathered with candles in their hands, honoring the survivors and the heroes of the storm. On the main stage stood a large projection showing the intertwined circles, the symbol of Project Two Hands. As the lights dimmed, Modi walked up to the podium. The crowd rose to their feet in applause. Sundar, seated beside Kavya in the front row, leaned down and whispered, "Just breathe, Beta. It's okay." The applause faded, and Modi began to speak. "Friends," he said softly, his voice calm but resonant, "today, we are not here to celebrate technology. We are here to celebrate humanity, the kind that hides in quiet corners, the kind that listens even when the world goes silent." His words flowed like gentle waves. "A few months ago, I received a message from a young girl. She wrote, 'Please don't let them be forgotten.' At the time, I did not know her name. I only knew the purity of her heart." He paused, glancing at Kavya. She lowered her eyes, nervous but emotional. "That girl," Modi continued, "was Kavya Pichai. She built a network that could hear the unheard. She turned grief into courage and gave the world a lesson no textbook can teach, that innovation without empathy is just machinery, but empathy with innovation becomes light." The hall was silent. Every word seemed to echo deeper than the last. "When the cyclone struck," Modi said, his tone trembling slightly, "it was her code that lit up the dark coastlines. It was her courage that carried the signal forward. And it was her promise to a lost friend, Mira, that became a lifeline for thousands." A soft gasp rippled through the audience. Some delegates wiped their eyes. Sundar's vision blurred as tears pooled, but he tried to remain composed. Modi looked down for a moment, gathering his thoughts, then looked up again. "We talk of artificial intelligence, but what Kavya has shown us is something greater, emotional intelligence. The intelligence of kindness. She proved that even in an age of machines, the human heart still leads the way." The audience began to applaud softly, their claps growing louder with each second until the hall thundered with emotion. But Modi raised his hand, asking for silence again. "And now," he said slowly, "I will tell you something this young girl never told the world. When I met her, she said she did not want fame. She said she just wanted her friend to be remembered. So today, on behalf of India, and on behalf of every child who believes kindness can save the world, we will build one more center, named Mira and Kavya Institute for Compassionate Technology." The crowd rose to their feet. Sundar stood too, unable to hold back his tears anymore. Kavya looked up at Modi with disbelief, her lips trembling, but Modi wasn't finished. He looked directly at her now, his eyes filled with warmth. "Kavya," he said softly, "you are young, but you have reminded us of something timeless. You showed that greatness is not about leading armies or companies. It's about leading hearts. You reminded me of my own mother's words. Never measure your worth by applause, but by the lives you quietly touch." The room fell silent again. No one moved. Even the cameras stopped clicking. Then, in a gesture no one expected, Modi folded his hands and bowed slightly toward her. "On behalf of this nation," he said, voice breaking slightly, "thank you for reminding us what humanity truly means." The hall erupted in tears and applause. Diplomats stood, some clapping, some wiping their eyes. Cameras flashed, but for once, it wasn't about politics or spectacle. It was about truth. Sundar placed his hand on Kavya's shoulder, whispering, "You see, Beta? This is what your mother always taught us. Humility shines brighter than any title." Kavya couldn't respond. She stood slowly, walked toward the stage, and hugged Modi. The entire hall went silent again, overwhelmed by the simplicity of that moment. Modi whispered to her, "The world will remember your name, but I want you to remember something too. Every time you help someone, you are keeping Mira alive." As she stepped back, the applause began again, rising higher, filling every corner of the hall. But there was one more surprise. A large screen lit up behind them, showing a live feed from the coastal village where it had all begun. Hundreds of children from Mira's old school stood holding candles in a circle. In the center was a glowing drone, hovering gently with the same blue light. Their voices, carried through the broadcast, said together, "Thank you, Kavya Akka. Thank you, Mira Akka." Kavya covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Even Modi wiped his eyes. The screen zoomed out, revealing that the children had formed something remarkable. The same intertwined circles that had become the symbol of Project Two Hands. As the camera panned higher, sunlight reflected off the ocean, turning the circles into a bright halo of light. Sundar whispered to himself, "Two hands, one hope, forever." That night, when the event ended and the crowd dispersed, Modi walked outside to where the air was cool and quiet. Sundar joined him, both men standing side by side under the stars. "You know," Modi said softly, "when I was young, I believed kindness was a private act. But now I see. It is the world's greatest public service." Sundar smiled faintly. "You gave her the courage to believe in that, sir." "No," Modi replied gently, shaking his head. "She gave it to us." Inside the hall, Kavya stood alone by the stage, looking at Mira's box under the spotlight. She opened it one last time, touching the small chip inside. Her reflection shimmered on the polished surface like the sea at dawn. She whispered softly, "We did it, Mira. Your light reached the world." And just then, a faint breeze moved through the open doors, flickering the candles that lined the hall. One flame separated, drifting toward her, glowing brighter as it passed. It stopped near her hand for a second, as if saying goodbye, before fading gently into the air. Kavya smiled through tears, because she knew. It wasn't goodbye. It was the world's quietest thank you. The legacy that never faded. Months passed since the storm, but its memory still lingered like the echo of rain on an old roof. The world had moved on with its usual noise, news cycles, politics, new inventions. But in quiet corners of India, a different kind of movement began. Teachers, students, and volunteers started gathering in small community centers to build what they called kindness labs. They weren't funded by corporations or governments. They were powered by ordinary people who had heard Kavya's story and believed that kindness could also be coded into the world. And at the heart of it all stood a small coastal village, the same one where Mira once lived, and where the first Mira and Kavya Institute for Compassionate Technology now stood. The once broken school had become a glowing beacon of learning. Walls were freshly painted with bright drawings of drones, rivers, and children holding hands across the sky. Solar panels glimmered on the roof. The villagers called it Lighthouse, because, as one elder said, when you enter, you feel like the world has finally remembered us. Kavya and Sundar returned there on a humid afternoon, nearly 6 months after the storm. They were welcomed not with cameras or formalities, but with flowers made of recycled paper crafted by the children. An old song played in the background, one that Mira used to hum while fixing radios with her father. As Kavya stepped into the classroom, she froze. On the wall hung a simple painting. 2 young girls holding hands, one wearing spectacles, the other with a ribbon in her hair. Beneath them, in small handwriting, were the words, "Hope never ends." Tears filled her eyes. "She's everywhere here," she whispered. Sundar placed his hand gently on her shoulder. Because she never really left Beta. She just changed forms. The headmaster, the same elderly man they had met months ago, approached them with a smile. "Look," he said softly, handing Kavya a tablet. "The children made this with the new coding module you donated." On the screen was a simple app designed by 10-year-olds. When opened, it played a heartbeat sound, then displayed the message, "If you're reading this, you are not alone. Someone somewhere cares about you." Kavya pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. "They built this?" she asked. "Yes," the headmaster said proudly. "They said it's inspired by you and Mira. They call it the comfort signal. It doesn't save lives with machines. It saves hearts with words." A faint laugh escaped her lips, mixed with tears. Mira would have loved this. In the corner of the classroom, Shankar, Mira's father, sat quietly, repairing a small solar panel. He looked older but peaceful now. When he saw them, he stood up slowly, folding his hands. "Welcome home," he said simply. Kavya ran to him and hugged him tightly. "We kept our promise," she whispered. "Yes," he said, smiling faintly. "And she kept hers. Look around you. Every child here carries her light." They walked together through the new learning lab. Children worked with tiny circuits, coding drones and building devices to clean water from the ponds. Their laughter filled the air. One girl looked up and said, "Auntie, is it true that your friend built the first signal that could talk to the sky?" Kavya smiled softly. "Yes, it's true. She built it because she wanted to make sure no one ever felt invisible again." The girl nodded seriously. "Then one day I'll build one that talks to space, so the stars can hear too." The room burst into gentle laughter. Sundar stood near the doorway, watching quietly. In his eyes, pride and humility mixed into something deeper, a father's realization that his daughter's kindness had already outgrown fame, success, even time itself. That evening, the village gathered by the shore for a small ceremony. Modi had sent a recorded message, played on a projector against a white sheet stretched between palm trees. His face appeared under the soft glow of lanterns. "Dear children," his voice echoed gently, "what began as a message of one child's compassion has now become a movement of millions. Project Two Hands is no longer just an Indian innovation. It is now used in Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America. Every day, new signals light up from villages that once lived in silence. This is India's gift to humanity, hope made real." He paused, his tone turning tender. "And to Kavya, I say again, you did not just build a network of machines. You built a network of hearts. The future you've created will speak not in data, but in love. And as long as love travels through these signals, your friend Mira will never be gone." When the message ended, the crowd clapped softly, not loudly, out of respect, not excitement. Even the waves seemed gentler that night, as though the ocean itself was listening. As people dispersed, Kavya walked toward the water's edge holding Mira's box. The sky was scattered with stars and their reflection danced on the surface of the sea. Sundar followed her, his footsteps quiet on the sand. "Papa," she said after a while, "I think I know why she built the first drone with that symbol." Sundar tilted his head. "Why, Beta?" She pointed to the horizon where the sky and sea met like two halves of one world. "Because even when they're apart, they're always connected." "That's what the two circles mean," he smiled gently. "And now you've connected them." She nodded, then opened the box one last time. Inside was the tiny chip, the same one Mira had designed. She held it in her palm, letting the sea breeze touch it. "Goodbye, my friend," she whispered softly. "Your signal will keep flying." And with that, she placed the chip in a small drone, the very first one rebuilt from Mira's original design. It was painted with the words, "Hope never ends." She pressed the button and the drone lifted into the air, its blue light glowing like a star. The villagers looked up as it rose higher, spinning slowly, its light reflecting on every face. And then, something miraculous happened. Other drones, hundreds of them from the nearby research centers, began to lift too, automatically linking with her signal. Together, they formed a glowing pattern in the sky, two circles, intertwined, brighter than ever before. The crowd gasped. Children shouted with joy. Shankar fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face, whispering his daughter's name over and over. Sundar held Kavya close as they watched. "She's still here," he murmured. Kavya nodded through tears. "And she always will be." The drones hovered for a while before slowly drifting apart, scattering into the night sky like shooting stars, spreading light across the coastline. Later that night, as the crowd returned home, Kavya sat on the sand, writing something in her notebook. When Sundar asked what she was doing, she smiled and said, "Mira started with one message. Maybe I should send one too." She wrote carefully, her handwriting neat and full of quiet grace. "To every child who feels unseen, remember, kindness is a signal that never dies. Send it forward. Even if the world forgets your name, your light will find someone in the dark. Love, Kavya." She closed the notebook and looked at the horizon one last time before heading back to the institute. Years later, that message would be printed on the wall of every kindness lab in more than 50 countries. Students from all backgrounds, rich, poor, connected, isolated, would read it before every project. Some would call it the new pledge of innovation, and every year, on the anniversary of the Great Cyclone, a simple ceremony would take place at the same shore. No speeches, no media, just hundreds of glowing drones rising silently into the sky, forming the same two circles, the eternal sign of Project Two Hands. In the quiet glow of those lights, Mira's father would still come, placing flowers at the water's edge. Sundar, now older and gentler, would stand beside him. And sometimes, under the golden evening sky, a teenage girl's laughter would seem to echo faintly through the wind, as if she were there, still building, still caring, still sending her signal across the world. Because kindness, once released, never fades. It travels endlessly, through storms, through time, through hearts, until it finds another soul ready to carry it forward. And in that endless journey, the world keeps shining.